Hello and welcome everyone to the first ever episode of Down to the Wire, sports talk show with Bernal. I'm your host, Desmond Bernal. You can also call me Des. And throughout this sports talk show, I'll be talking with various professionals in the sports media industry, asking them questions about their journey throughout the industry, and even asking questions on how the pandemic has shaped the industry this year. Today we have a great guest to kick off episode 1. He's a 2007 alum from the University of New Hampshire, so any Wildcats out there, and he's been a sports reporter / beat writer for roughly 14 years, starting his career at the Boston Herald and now currently working at a publication in my home state, Rhode Island. So go Rhodey, the Providence Journal. So Mark Daniels.
Hey man, thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for joining me, Mark. So we'll jump right into it. As I mentioned before, you started your career off at the Boston Herald, where you were assigned a wide variety of technical writing assignments. But one thing that's worth noting is you were able to provide the Boston Herald with full-time coverage of the New England Patriots 2012 and the 2013 season. And for Patriots fans out there, they know that 2012 season was a rough one, as the Patriots made it to the Super Bowl 46, but unfortunately lost to the New York Giants. So for the audience out there watching this on either YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, talk about your journey. How you started off as at the Boston Herald and now currently a full-time beat reporter for the New England Patriots at the Providence Journal.
Yeah, I've had kind of a wild journey. When I knew I wanted to be a sports writer since high school, and so when I went to the University of New Hampshire, the goal was always to sort of get into sports journalism. They didn't When I went to UNH, they really didn't have a sports writing program or anything like that. So I covered the University of New Hampshire football team, and I covered basketball team and hockey for the student paper. That was really my sort of start. And when I covered football for I want to say 3 years when I was there, the offensive coordinator at the time was Chip Kelly, and that was of course before he went to Oregon, before he went into the NFL. So UNH had this awesome, just high flying, high octane offense. It was just a lot of fun to watch. And truthfully, I fell in love with covering football at that point at UNH. So when I graduated in 2007, what I wanted to do was become a football writer at some point. I wanted to cover either college or the Patriots, the NFL. I mean, honestly, it didn't matter. It could have been UNH, and I would have been really happy to do it. But I started at the Boston Herald as an editorial assistant. It's basically, you're on the low rung. I was editing stats in an office until, I want to say, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was doing some Friday nights, Saturday nights. So I'm out of college. My friends are out partying on Friday and Saturday, and I'm in an office, like waiting for these West Coast baseball games to get over so I can put the box score in the paper for the next day. That was my primary job out of school, and that was in '07. And honestly, it took me a good 4 years to sort of work my way up the ladder to get writing opportunities. And it started small, high school stuff, or little league games. I covered professional lacrosse teams that don't exist. I wrote about every sport under the sun. I got into MMA, and I started to cover the UFC for the Boston Herald. And all that led me to covering the Patriots, the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Bruins. So yeah, in 2011, my bosses at the time sent me to training camp to cover the Pats. And I've been doing it ever since. That year, they sent me to cover the Super Bowl in Indy when the Pats lost to the Giants in 2011. And I covered the Pats with some pretty big heavy hitters. Ann Rappaport was the beat writer at the time with Karen Gregan. And then it was Jeff Howe. So I learned from those three just immensely. And I did that from 2011 to 13 until a job opened up at the Providence Journal, and I joined there. I want to say spring of 2014. So my first year, officially on the beat was when, the Pats beat the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, the Malcolm Butler interception. All in all, I've been to 5 Super Bowls. I'm really lucky, I kind of cut on right there at the tail end at the right time. And yeah, man, it's crazy because I started off again editing stats in a newspaper at 2 o'clock in the morning, making no money. It was really a grind. It was hard. It was challenging. At times it was depressing. I didn't think it was like where's the light at the end of the tunnel? But I busted my ass to the point where they almost had to give me writing opportunities because I was maximizing my opportunities in the office doing this stats stuff. So yeah, it's taken a lot of hard work. And it's also taking connections too. I mean, I met my first sports editor at the Providence Journal on a bus shuttling the media to the media entrance at Gillette Stadium. And I introduced myself to him in 2013 because I heard their football writer was going to retire. So I struck up a relationship on a bus. I applied for the job the next year and I got it. And Yeah, man, I've been, living my dream, I'd say, ever since.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I believe, like you kind of talked about in the beginning, everyone has a story. I had a similar story like you. Kind of started writing in my high school. I went to Bishop Hendricken, so anyone in the Rhode Island area might know that school. And kind of wrote for the Warwick Beacon, a local newspaper there, just kind of getting the grasp of sports writing. But ultimately, as a kid, I always loved watching Sports Center, listening to Stuart Scott, John Anderson every day, just be able to talk about the sports and highlights that happened the previous day. So what was like, can you dive in a little bit more about your story? Like you said, when you were in high school, you just knew.
Yeah, well, in high school, we did this thing where it was a job shadow program. It was like a project. So essentially, you had to shadow someone for one day. And honestly, most of my friends would like say they would shadow their parents and just stay home, not do anything. And my mom honestly worked the phones. And one of the places I job shadows was at the Boston Herald. So they let me shadow this writer at the time. His name's Steve Conroy. He's their Bruins beat writer, but he was covering a Red Sox game. So like, come hang out with one of our sports writers. He's going to cover, it was the Red Sox. I remember it was the Red Sox versus Blue Jays. Hideo Nomo was pitching for the Sox. He threw like a complete game. It was like shutout, one hit. It was really cool. But I'm sitting there in the press box with all these other sports writers, watching the Red Sox game. And I'm like, yeah, I could get used to this, right? Getting paid to go watch a baseball game and write about it. And from there, I joined my student paper as well in high school. I went to Pinkerton Academy in Darien, New Hampshire. Trying to think our paper's name, I want to say, was the Astro. And yeah, I wrote about sports for the paper there, and I knew my sophomore year in high school because of the job shadow. So yeah, when I graduated college, though, the sports editor who let me do the job shadow for the day was still in charge, and that's how I got my in, because I contacted him. He didn't remember me at all, but I told him this story. I'm like, I was in high school for one day, and you let me shadow in one of your writers, and that just turned into a job interview for an entry level gig. So it's funny how it all played out.
Yeah, it's interesting how like one little connection you never know can go really far away. Um, But as we've been talking about, you've said we really mentioned pretty two well-known publications in the Boston Herald and the Providence Journal. Just take me what it's been like being able to work for. I looked up and it was roughly around six years at the Herald, and then now coming on to 7 years at the Journal. So just talk about those experiences and how much they've helped you with your career as a sports writer.
Yeah, I viewed my time at the Boston Herald almost like going to grad school. I was 4 years at UNH. I had an awesome time. I had a lot of fun. I loved covering UNH sports, but there was still I had a lot I had to learn about sports writing, especially writing for a newspaper. The newspaper, one of the hardest things are the deadlines. So you go to a game, they want a story, right as the game ends. So you're watching this game and you're writing as the game goes on, while also trying to pay attention to what's actually happening. And that's challenging. It's hard if you've never done it before. And it took me a little while, at the Boston Herald to sort of get that type of stuff down. But I was being exposed to these copy editors who were veterans of the game, and I was this young kid coming out of college who I had to learn, the ins and outs of the industry. So I spent almost, a little over 6 years at the Boston Herald, and I learned just so much. I grew. Like it's crazy. There was a point, I kind of felt it. I want to say 4 or 5 years in, where I'm like, all right, I kind of get it now. And I think part of learning this industry or learning the job is getting over like a mental hurdle. You go to a Red Sox game or a Patriots game for the first time, and there's a part of you that you're so excited to be there, but if you make too much out of it, it's going to get in your head. You're not going to write as well as you want. You can't go into any story saying this is going to be the best story of my life. You just have to go in and be confident and, sort of take a deep breath and make sure you don't make any dumb mistakes. And I think all of that, writing on deadline, just getting used to asking professional athletes questions are things a lot of young writers have to go through. Like the first time you're in a locker room with the Patriots, it's kind of intimidating. You're surrounded by professional athletes who frankly don't want to be your friend, and you need to approach them, build relationships, ask them questions. You don't want to ask dumb questions, but everyone does it. So what's going to happen when you approach a guy and he just sort of tells you he doesn't want to talk to you or he's rude to you? How do you react? And I think what I learned at the Boston Herald was just how to deal with all that stuff. That really helped me. And at the Providence Journal, they gave me an opportunity to be a full-time beat writer for the New England Patriots, like 24/7. That's my job. That's all I do. I'm just obsessed with the Patriots because that's sort of my life. And I've learned a lot covering the Patriots full time, and I've had some really great bosses that I've worked with, and they've given me freedom to do different things, and it's just I don't know. I think a cool thing with journalism is that no matter how old you are, you can always get better. You're always improving. It's not like, all right, yeah, I became a beat writer, I got the job I want to get, and I'm gonna like coast. No, be better, break more news, write better stories, try to win writing awards and all that stuff. So the goals are always changing, but you can always grow. And I definitely grew with the Boston Herald. I was just so raw coming out of college, and I'd say I definitely matured. At the Providence Journal, being one of the I don't know how many beat writers there are now who cover the Pats. It feels like there's a dozen, but there's a lot of us out there, and it's tough to be different. But it's been a fun ride.
Awesome. Yeah. I've had a little experience kind of in the locker room. My spring semester last year, landed actually a pretty interesting internship working with the New York Knicks and their public relations
Oh,
team.
cool.
Just a different side of communications, kind of testing waters and going in the locker room one time, doing an interview just with my phone in front of Julius Randle, just listening to what he's saying to all the sports reporters there from the New York area, and actually even having the opportunity to go up to Danilo Gallinari, who played for the Oklahoma City Thunder at the time. Was just an amazing experience, and like you said, allowed me to kind of mature to just not be afraid to go up to players and ask
Yeah.
questions and things along that line. So I think this actually kind of helps in the next segment of my show, because the whole atmosphere of my talk show is to just allow other aspiring sports writers, to get the chance to gain additional knowledge about the industry. So what skills do you feel are important for young, inspiring journalists, just like myself, who's a senior in college, trying to learn to jump into the field and industry and climb the ladders?
Yeah, I always tell aspiring sports writers that if you want to be a writer, what you have to do is write. It's the simplest advice, right? But I mean that you need to find an outlet to do it consistently, because the more you write, the better you're going to get. And yeah, you could start your own website, or do your own thing. But like, for the people who get a chance to write, where you have an editor or someone giving you assignments, whether it be an internship at a newspaper, a website, those moments are just invaluable, because you're doing the job. And honestly, in this industry, to do it well, you just need experience. It's all a matter of just writing and writing, and with that, it's learning how to interview, learning how to ask questions, learning how to write different types of stories. And I think you don't want to pigeonhole yourself as, say, like, your goal is to be a columnist. Don't just write columns. You need to learn how to write feature stories, short stories, game stories. You really need to sort of diversify your portfolio. Learn how to write a different types of stories, because it's going to help you in the long run. Like, whatever, the Providence Journal asks you to come in freelance and they want you to write a game story, say the cover of Bryant basketball, it would help if you've done it before. And if you haven't done it before, you need to do the best you can. But it's all about, in this industry, just doing it to get better. Like, it's not easy to ask some of these professional athletes questions, but if you're covering a high school game, it really shouldn't be that much different, right? A kid makes a game-winning shot, whether it's for the Celtics or for Providence High School. It's all about what was going through your mind in that moment. What did you see? How do you feel? It's all sort of the same in a sense. And the more experience you get just doing this job, the better you're going to get. That's the biggest thing. It's like with some kids who I talk with in college, I'm like, oh, do you write for your student paper, or have you written before? And a lot of times they're like, no. I'm like, all right, just try it out, because if you get a chance, even if it's for free and you're in college, but you get a chance to cover anything. It could be men's tennis, golf, soccer. You never know when that experience is going to help, because it really could pay off in some form or fashion. So my experience is just my advice is just get more experience, because if you really want to do this, try to do it and you'll get better. You will. So you have to work really hard in this industry, but the people who make it are the people who just grind and they get better. Because I've seen a lot of younger writers who have talent, but they don't have that extra gear, because it gets hard sometimes and it gets frustrating, and maybe you feel stuck, you're not getting the opportunities. But I promise you, if you bust your butt, good things will happen.
Definitely. So kind of segueing off of that, for young aspiring sports writers in my field who are in college or even high school, what tools would you give that advice for them to use at those levels, like high school, maybe going and shadowing like you did at a local newspaper, or even in college, joining your school newspaper and writing for the school stories, even if you're just a sports writer or a sports reporter, and then you kind of build your way up to a sports editor of the paper. What advice would you give to young aspiring sports reporters in that aspect?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it certainly helped that when my high school had the job shadow program, and then my college had the student paper, and when I went to UNH, they had an internship program too. It's the reason I went there, is because for one semester I got to be a full-time writer. I wasn't a sports writer; I was a news writer for a local paper, the Eagle Tribune. But all that stuff really helps. So if you're a younger writer, and it doesn't hurt to contact your local paper, even how big or small they are, to see what I say things they could have you do, but like maybe they would let you job shadow a writer for a day. I've at the Projo, I've had a lot of kids follow me around for a day, whether it be in the Patriots locker room or at training camp, just to see what I do. And I think that's a great thing. I've had, kids from college come and shadow me for a day, and that stuff helps. And again, but it also builds connections and relationships. So if you're an aspiring sports writer and you contact your local paper's sports editor about, advice he could give you, or maybe allowing you to freelance or job shadow him, it's going to create another connection that could help you in the future. And I think that's pretty big. Like, connections are huge in this industry. It does not hurt to know people. It does not hurt to ask for advice. Just not just sports writers either. You have to remember, like, there are a lot of times some I would say high school or college kids contact me about getting a job at the Providence Journal. And I have to be honest, I don't hire people, right? My job is just to cover the Patriots. So I would say, if you really want to work at the Providence Journal or learn how, contact the sports editor there, Bill Corey, or pick any paper in the US, right? Contact the sports editor there and ask them the type of advice they could give you. Because if you could make some type of connection, whether it's, going out for lunch or whatnot, it could help you. And that's exactly what happened to me. I did a 1-day job shadow with the Boston Herald. That led to me, let's say 6 years later, getting a job. I then rode a bus, when I was at the Boston Herald with the sports editor of the Providence Journal. I introduced myself. That turned into me getting an interview and a job at the Projo. Like, some of that stuff was random and by chance, but it was all about connections for me.
Awesome, awesome. And kind of keeping on this more educational skills type of questions, what kind of soft skills, like more communication, leadership, etc., do you feel aspiring journalists should acquire? Not only just being, like you said, a strong writer, a strong interviewer, having those strong hard skills. What other soft skills should young aspiring sports writers out there try to acquire when they're in their early stages from high school and even in college?
I'd say almost like public speaking. Learn how to speak into a crowd, or not crowd. What I'm talking about. Public speaking is important because you need to have confidence that, one, you can sort of think on your feet, but two, you can talk to people who necessarily don't want to talk to you. And it's not always easy. One of the first times I was in a pro locker room was with Fenway Park with the Red Sox. I wanted to ask Jason Varitek a question, and he essentially got mad at me and started to yell at me. I had no idea what I did. It was very confusing, but it didn't stop me from asking him a question again the next day, or talking to other people in the locker room. And I think if you can learn sort of like public speaking, just being confident, saying your opinions, it'll help you in those settings. But honestly, some of it is just it's hard to prepare to go into like a pro locker room to approach an athlete, because you grow up, playing video games with these people, or wearing their jerseys, or collecting, you want autographs from them. They're famous. And then you don't exactly want to treat them like that. And it's hard to get those skills. But I would say, one good thing to work on is just public speaking. Even, when people do radio interviews or on TV, it's good to know how to talk and articulate your feelings, because there's times we all get our words jumbled up. But if you can, nab down that public speaking when you're in high school, it's certainly going to help you.
Awesome, definitely, definitely. So, I mean, as we can see right here, for people who are going to watch a video when this comes out on YouTube, um, this is over Zoom, and a lot of things that we know, and being in a pandemic with COVID-19, a lot of things kind of shifted towards more online, more Zooms for sports reporters not being able to have media access. So what would you say the pandemic has shaped the sports media industry this year with all COVID guidelines, protocols, safety protocols, etc.?
Yeah, it's completely changed my job. I'd say I always prided myself to go into Gillette Stadium, the Patriots locker room, talk to an athlete one-on-one, and write a story with an interview that no one else has. Like, why should you go to the Providence Journal to read the Patriots? Well, I have interviews that no one else has. That's why you should come read me. I have unique content. Well, if we're all doing our interviews the same way, it's going to be really hard to have unique content. We're all getting the same interviews with Cam Newton or Devin McCourty. So it's forced me to be more creative. It's forced me to be more analytic, whether it be watching more game film or diving into statistics, it's forced me to sort of branch out and write more columns about the team. That's one way I can be different, is put my opinion out there. I've had to branch out a little bit. 2020 was hard. It was hard for all of us for a lot of different reasons, but professionally, it was so challenging to have and deal with the same interviews as everyone else, right? I really enjoy the personal connection with an athlete, because it gets a chance for me to show them, hey, I understand that you're a human being, as am I. You a dad? I'm a dad. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you watch on TV or what music you listen to. Maybe we have something in common. You can't do that over Zoom. So last year made my job a lot harder. It made me be a little bit more creative with my story ideas. It made me write more columns. It wasn't a bad thing, but I cannot wait to get back into that locker room and talk to some people face to face. It'll be amazing when that finally happens. But yeah, 2020 was hard.
Yeah, just talk to me, because as you said before, it's different not being able to go into the locker room. Um, are there any other challenges, like maybe only being able to say one question to, like, let's say Cam Newton or James White, Julian Edelman after the game, not being able to kind of ask multiple questions and being kind of forced and stuck to just stick to, all right, I need to find my best one question I'm going to ask Cam?
Yeah, that's really huge, because when I'm writing like a main story for the Providence Journal, I always think of like, all right, if I have 3 good quotes, I'm set, and my story's around 700 words, I'm good. But with Zoom, I get one question, so I have to hope that either there are other quotes that I can use, or with my one question, I have to branch off, and maybe I ask Bill Belichick a question about Cam Newton, so I have the Belichick quote. Then I have to make sure I get in with Cam Newton, because there's 20 people want to ask him a question. So raise my hand, hit the raise hand function really early, and just hope I get in. It's challenging, and there's sometimes the interview ends and I'm like, man, I have one quote that I can really use. Like, well, what else can I do here? And that's when sort of analytics get into it. Like, can I dive into stats to get something interesting to make my story different? But yeah, that aspect's so tough. Like, after games, I would sometimes stick in 1 or 2 interviews. I'd ask, 2 to 4 questions. I'm like, all right, I have my story. I'm good. I know what I'm doing. There was just a lot more of, like, I would say almost of a sense winging it, because you go into an interview, you say you're going to ask one question. What happens if you don't get it picked? What if, like when I was covering Tom Brady and the Bucs for the Super Bowl and pretty much the playoffs, the Buccaneers PR never called my hand for Tom Brady, ever. It was driving me crazy. I'm like, all right, I want one question. It's clearly going to be about the Patriots, but it never happened. So every time my boss would be like, all right, Brady's talking, you're writing about him today, I almost didn't know what I was writing, because it got to the point like 4 weeks in, I'm like, they're not going to call me because they haven't. So I just had to be sort of creative, hear what he's saying. And sometimes you have to write off what they're talking about. It's not ideal, but that's just what the pandemic has done in sports writing. It sort of handcuffs you a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You could easily see, as someone, as a sports writer, that challenge. And that's like was a question I always had of, you'd always see the post game questions and you see them on Zoom, and the PR staff would say, all right, this writer's up next. And then I always like wondered, like, okay, how did they decide who goes next? And how do you get that chance? So it is interesting to see. You really have to be creative of what question am I going to ask to get that quote I need for my story. So shifting gears here, since you are a beat reporter for the New England Patriots, I thought it'd be awesome to kind of add in some Patriots talk here. I mean, it's a pretty interesting season last year with Cam Newton. Had a great start, but unfortunately with COVID happening, his numbers kind of dwindled down and the season kind of went into an array. But as you wrote in one of your sports columns, the quarterback position is going to be dictating the Patriots offseason once again. From your reporting of the Patriots so far, who do you think the Patriots will likely be their quarterback for next season? Will it be Cam Newton again, or do you think they'll potentially try to go high and draft one of the young studs in either Zach Wilson or Justin Fields, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been writing about this for about 2 months, and I wish I had a great answer. I think the Patriots would love to have Jimmy Garoppolo for the next couple of years. He has experience in the system, and although he didn't start many games for him, he started two. He looked good for those, two starts, or really it was 1.5, but he has experience with Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick. I think that'd be a great option that the Pats would love to have. I know Bill likes him. I know Josh McDaniels likes him. The problem is that he's under contract with the 49ers, and unless they can get an upgraded quarterback, they're not going to trade or release Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think that would probably be at the top of the Patriots wish list. And after that, there's just a ton of questions of sort of what ifs, right? Do they bring back Cam Newton? I think Cam Newton is a good leader and a good person, and he didn't have a lot to work with, but he has so many limitations when it comes to throwing the ball that I would be concerned about adding him to the team. But I don't think you can say like 100% chance Cam Newton's not with the team. I mean, I think there's probably a 30 to 40% chance Cam is back, but I think the Pats are trying to upgrade and they're trying to figure out who's available. Would the Jets trade Sam Darnold to the Patriots? That would be surprising, but I'm sure the Pats would entertain it. Would the Pats take on Deshaun Watson? Of course, who wouldn't? There's only a handful of teams that wouldn't want Deshaun Watson, but the Pats don't have, the draft capital that Miami or the Jets have. So I don't see that happening. So as this all plays out, I mean, I almost wonder if it'll be a Cam Newton or a Marcus Mariota type. And if it is, if the Pats bring in like an Alex Smith or Mariota, Cam Newton, they're probably going to trade up in the draft. They're probably going to draft. If they don't trade up, it'll be a first or second round quarterback. You have him compete in camp with Cam Newton or like a Ryan Fitzpatrick type, and then you at some point say, all right, this rookie, this young guy is our guy. So maybe week 1, 2021, it's not a rookie quarterback starting. Maybe it is Cam Newton. Hell, maybe it's Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I would, if they draft someone this year, they're probably looking at him for their long-term guy in 2022 at the very least. However, if you spend, say, multiple draft picks to move from 15 to 7 or 8, and you draft Trey Lance, there's going to be a part of you that says, you know what, the best thing for this kid would be to start pretty early. So, if that's the goal, is to trade up and start a rookie quarterback, who would be the best guy to have with them? Is it Cam Newton in a backup role? I don't know. Maybe it's Ryan Fitzpatrick in that case. So I'd lean towards the Patriots finding a young guy in the draft, pairing him with a veteran. Maybe it is Cam Newton. I'd be surprised at this point if Cam Newton's back, even though you can't rule it out. So I'd put that like 30%. So, if the 49ers somehow, add a quarterback, my answer changes because I think it's Jimmy Garoppolo. But until that happens, I'm going to go with, someone like Marcus Mariota or Cam Newton or Ryan Fitzpatrick and pair him with Trey Lance or a Mac Jones type. I think that'll be the avenue what the Pats do.
Definitely. It'll be definitely interesting to see what the Patriots do once again this offseason. A lot of question marks, a lot of high hopes for Patriot fans out there. And then lastly, we're in the month of March now, which means only a month away from the NFL draft, which is scheduled to start or go off on April 29th. And as we just talked, the Patriots actually have 7 picks in this year's draft, and they actually have the 15th overall pick in the first round draft. So what do you think? Do you think, as we've seen and many Patriots fans have seen, as you've seen covering the Patriots for a while, Patriots normally usually trade down in their first pick and settle for more late round picks? Or do you think, as many reports have stated, Patriots get very aggressive and try to make moves and even go, as we spoke earlier, go higher up into the draft?
Yeah, I think they're in a good position where even if they sit at 15, they don't have to draft a quarterback. And if you sit at 15, you could get, one of the best, pass rushers in this draft. I mean, a kid from Rhode Island who went to Michigan, Kwity Paye, is a really, he's a good pass rusher. And there's this other kid from Miami, Gregory Rousseau. But if they sit at 15 and they don't draft a quarterback, it's because they think they have a day one impact player. So, you look at the Pats, they have a ton of holes, linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle. I mean, maybe offensive tackle, receiver, tight end. They draft one of those players at 15 and they view him as a future core piece. That's the right move. So they don't necessarily have to draft a quarterback or even trade up. I mean, personally, I would love to see him trade up and get aggressive. They're in a spot where they need to add more better younger talent, essentially. Like, who are the blue chip prospects on the Patriots right now? I mean, Kyle Duggar, Chase Winovich, Damian Harris. You need more. So I hope they don't trade back. I know Patriots fans will lose their minds and sort of burn down Twitter if that happens. I would love to see them be aggressive. And the last time they were really aggressive was in 2012. They traded up twice in the first round for Chandler Jones and Dante Hightower. That worked out really well. I think they should entertain the notion. So either I'd say stay pat, 15, or trade up and just get a stud, because you're in position with a draft that's pretty deep that you can get one, even if it's not a quarterback.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to be interesting as a Patriots fan, as myself and a Boston sports fan. It kind of stinks to see how the Patriots finished last season. And then obviously Tom Brady does his thing over there in Tampa and brings them a Super Bowl championship. So it's going to be, as we said, definitely interesting this season. I'm going to ask one last question to just leave it up on a high note. What are you looking forward to, as you spoke earlier, not being able to go to Gillette this season, be reporting this season, next season? What are you hoping to just be able to be there at Gillette and, like you said, be able to go in the locker room and just speak on that as aspect as we end here in this show?
One big part about my job that people might not realize, I travel to all the games. So the away games, I didn't do that last year. And part of the traveling, honestly, is hanging out with the other sports writers on the beat. And, I have 2 kids. I'm married. I'm not going out a lot, but when I'm on the road, it's a lot of fun. And the social aspect of my job is fantastic. I miss that. I miss being able to be out in Buffalo and get some buffalo wings, or down in Miami, or hanging out in Fort Lauderdale and seeing all these different cities. That's one cool part about my job. Like, I don't know why I would ever go to Cincinnati or Cleveland, or, have chances to spend time in San Diego and LA, but I've done that with my job. I've spent, weeks in Houston and Atlanta. I miss it. I'm looking forward to traveling again and going to see other football stadiums, because that's a lot of fun. There's nothing like walking through the parking lot in Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City and it smells like ribs. Like, that's amazing. Like, it's a really, really cool place. So I miss traveling. I can't wait. Even like Buffalo. Buffalo was a great trip. Their fans are nuts. Their stadium's nuts. The tailgating's crazy. The food is good. Like, I'm looking forward to going back to Buffalo. So yeah, I want to get in the Pats locker room and get some good interviews, but I want to go on the road again too and just go to all these different stadiums. I missed it last year. We were supposed to go to Seattle, and I've never been to Seattle, so I'm bummed out about that. So I want to see some more cool stadiums for sure.
Awesome. Well, all the people listening here will definitely be watching, and all people listening here are probably Boston sports fans, if not, but even out there, Boston sports fans are probably definitely excited to get back to Gillette Stadium and watch some Patriots football. So I just want to say thank you, Mark, for coming on my show today. Really appreciate it. Just hearing your experience through the sports media industry and as a beat reporter for the New England Patriots. It was just amazing to hear your story. You gave a lot of insightful information for aspiring sports reporters like myself out there who really want to try to jump into the field. So that sums it up for the episode 1. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate you listening to this interview. And until then, be safe, stay positive, and just keep reaching your goals.